this quilt that we are doing today is inspired by typical things that we think about when it comes to St. Patrick's Day. On the screen, you'll see that I have done some 4-leaf clovers, and I decided to go with a gnome because I can't really do faces, and gnomes are so cute. So the gnome is representing our leprechaun. So let me get started showing you how to make some of the blocks of this quilt. I have my comfort cutter, 45 millimeter, and my 28 millimeters. I'm also going to be using our wonderful 360 circle cutter. I also have some square rulers, so our 6.5 and 9.5 inch ruler. Love my 3x18 and my 24.5 by 6.5 ruler.
There is a free pattern in the description of this video, so you can print that out and follow along with me.
Let's start with our clover blocks. You're going to need 4 5-inch squares, and I've done these in different colors. And you're also going to need 12 of these 2.5-inch blocks. You are going to be drawing on these diagonal lines, but sometimes it just really helps to draw the pattern by laying them out. And so I'm just going to draw with an erasable pen. Now for sewing, the way that I want to do this, I'm going to do a scant 1/4 inch, which means I'm going to sew on this side of these lines that I drew. And that's just going to give me plenty of material when I fold over, guarantee myself a 9.5 inch block. So I'm gonna head over to our little rebel and do the quilting later. So one of the things that helps me keep an eye on my scant 1/4 inch is our 1/4 inch hopping foot that we have here, because I can place my edge of the 1/8 right along that line, and I'm gonna be just slightly over to give me that perfect scant 1/4 inch. Now I'm ready to cut my seam allowance. So I'm going to line up the seam that I sewed on the 1/4 inch of my 3x18, and I'm just gonna cut off those corners. Now we're gonna press out all of our triangles. So let's line up our design again. Now we can sew our columns and rows together. Now for this part, I really want to get my corners to line up. So feel free to pin or clip. And now we're doing a straight 1/4 inch seam. And I'm just double checking and holding. So I do want my seams to nest. So I am going to press my seams opposite directions. Now I like to press on both sides because it helps me get the seam the direction I want it when I start on the back side, and then I lock it in place from the front and make sure that I have my fabric nice and flat. So now I can lock that seam in, and I can put a pin right in that locked area if I want to. I'm also going to check and lock in the seams here for my corners. Now we're going to sew together our rows or columns depending on which way you set it up. So that looks pretty good. We're going to pop this center seam. And sometimes it will just pop for me really easy, and sometimes I've got to get in there and break a thread, but that's gonna create that little design where you can see all of the fabric. And I'm just gonna give that a little bit of a set, and then we'll finish pressing on the other side so we get our fabric, again, nice and flat. All right, so we're gonna make a total of 4 of these for our quilt. The centerpiece of your quilt is the gnome with his pot of gold. We are going to do some paper piecing. Now, several of the paper piecing is going to have multiple sections that you do separately and put together. So we have A, B, C, D, and E. That's how you would do the final assembly, but each one of those would be separate. Now, the pot of gold is the one I'm going to actually show you how to make, but the concept is the same for all of the pieces. One of the places that I struggle when it comes to foundation paper piecing is getting the right size of fabric for the different angles. So I have gone ahead and I have cut some pieces, and my recommendation is just to make sure that you cut larger than the space that you're going to need. And we are going to start in order. This is A, and this one goes, I believe, through F. This is the piece I've cut for my A1, and I want to make sure that I have the back of the fabric here that's going to go against the paper. Now, what you want to do before you actually start any assembly is fold your paper along all of those lines first. And I'll often fold both directions just so it'll make it nice. I'm now going to place this here. The next part I'm going to sew is A2. So I'm going to fold back at A2 here, and I'm going to cut my seam allowance. For the most of this, I'm going to use the method where I don't have to sew on the paper, but we are going to do some sewing on paper when it comes to final assembly. So you're getting both methods. When I do it this way, I align my 1/4 of an inch so it's just on the outside of that paper, and then I'm going to trim that piece. And now I'm going to take one of these pieces of yellow, and I'm going to lay this out, and then I'm going to fold this back over, take this to the sewing machine, and then we're going to sew those seam allowances. So to keep these in place, I did add some clips. It just makes it a little bit easier for me to get it to the sewing machine. And now I'm lining up the edge of the 1/8 section on the paper, and that's going to put my seam right next to the paper. After you sew it, you're going to fold your fabric back over, and with a dry iron press. So now we're going to do A3. So I'm going to fold along A3 here, line that up on the edge, trim off the excess for our seam allowance. And then the next one I'm adding is yellow. Now, paper piecing does take some practice, and I'll be honest, I did not love it at first, but it has grown on me. So if you've tried paper piecing before and you're like, this is not my jam, try some simpler patterns first that don't have a lot of small pieces, and just slowly build your skills. And before you know it, then you'll be doing those teeny tiny pieces like it's nothing. All right, so now we're going to trim our pieces. Now, some of our pieces that we're going to sew on actually didn't have any paper piecing to do in between the final piecing. All right, all of our pieces are cut. I made a boo-boo. This is why you want to have larger fabric. I didn't cut enough pieces, so I was short and I had to cut pieces in half. And so my 1/4 of an inch is a little shorter than that. I had to go with it because I don't have any extra, I forgot it. So next we're going to lay out our pattern. A is gonna go to B. After I sew those two on, C gets added. We're gonna add E and F to the D, and then D will go with the G, or you can sew the C to the D. That is how we're gonna sew those together. And now this is gonna give you, once you get it all aligned, this is the seam you're gonna sew. If I'm gonna sew on the paper, I need to tighten my stitch. It's gonna make the paper peel a little bit easier because it's gonna perforate it. If your stitch is larger, it's not gonna be as strong a stitch. So I've lowered mine, and now I'm gonna sew directly on that seam. I'm gonna do all the pieces that I need to sew together first. So you can see how easy that paper will come off with that tighter stitch. And there's just something a little satisfying about that. So one of the things I like to do is if I have these vertical seams here that are gonna go up against a horizontal seam, I like to go ahead and pull that paper off. It's just easier to pull it off there than it is after you sew the next seam. And I can go ahead and, with the dry iron, press those seams open. Now, some of these seams, depending on how complex your paper piecing project is, it might be better to go ahead and open that seam opposed to folding it over. And if I do that, then I have a tendency to go ahead and remove the top one as well, or fold it back. That part is going there, but remember, fabric sides together. And now we're going to press the last of our seams. Again, I think I'm going to open all these up. Now this seam here, I'm not going to open up because it's got a lot of seams coming together. So it'll just be easier to not fight all of that and fold it over. And I think at this point, I need a little bit of steam. All right, there is our finished block, and we'll go ahead and check it and trim it for the 9.5 as well. So I did a dumb thing, and I actually sewed my A and B part on wrong. So I went ahead and fixed it. So ta-da, this is how it's supposed to look. It's time for us to start making our rainbow border. And we're gonna start with the straight rainbow sides because we also have the curved pieces. So you're gonna need to cut strips of each color. And then you're also gonna have these 5 by 9.5 inch white blocks. And we're going to quickly sew these strips together. We have our strips sewn together, and I know you're probably really tempted to press. Don't press. We're now going to add our white pieces on, and that's going to go on the blue side. You should be able to get 4 white pieces per fabric strips. So I want to leave just a little bit of space between each white block so I have room to cut. So now we're just going to cut our pieces apart. We're not worried about perfect size yet. That's why we left ourselves that little bit of extra. 2 of these we're going to press away from the white, and we're going to press 2 towards the white. And that's going to allow us to nest those seams for assembly. Now we're going to trim our blocks, but we're only really going to worry about lining up the edges this way. Don't worry about the red because it's going to be on the outside, and you can deal with that after you've quilted it when you go to square up the final quilt. Here I'm using the 9.5-inch ruler, and my comfort cutter just connects right to the edge of that, so it makes cutting those really easy. While I'm finishing this up, do me a favor, like and subscribe, and tell us in the comments what your favorite memory is of St. Patty's Day. Now your white block should be 4 3/4, so you can always do kind of a quick check there, but you'll see that by alternating them, I'm going to be able to nest these, but I'm not ready to sew these together yet because I want to make the curve piece next. And they're going to end up looking like this. Now I'm going to be honest, curves can be a little intimidating, and I almost talked myself out of doing the curves for this, but it actually came out really easy. Now in the pattern you're going to have all these paper pieces. These are going to be your 4 colors in order: blue, green, yellow, and red. F here is going to be your background white piece. You can also cut this A piece. Now I decided not to do that because I liked how the quilt was coming out curved. So I have them laid out here. I'm going to start with this 1/4 pie first, and then I'm going to sew each of these on. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take your 1/4 pie and you are going to fold it in half and give it a good crease at the top of the arc. That is now going to mark your center. We're going to do that with all of our pieces. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the white and the blue, and I'm going to fold it so that this edge here is now this way. And I'm going to line up that little marking, and I'm going to add a pin. Now I'm going to carefully stretch this curve and pin as I go. Now you can do this on both sides. I find I'm good with half because then once I have half sewn down, it's very easy for me to continue that curve as I'm sewing. So I'm ready to start sewing. We're sewing 1/4 inch. The best advice that I can give you when it comes to this is take it slow. So I'm just going to kind of turn this down so that I'm not tempted to go too fast, and I'm just going to add each one of these pieces on. As I go, I'm going to remove those pins. It's really nice to have all of this throat space with the little rebel, that I can have all my tools up here while I'm doing something so complex. And then as you add each of your curved stripes on, you're going to press this way, so towards your stripes. Now we're going to add the next piece, and we're just going to continue to do this until all of our stripes are on. Okay, so this is where you have to kind of make the decision if you want that outer piece. I really only am worried about this edge and this edge. This will all work itself out when we finish the quilt, but I do want to straighten those edges out, and I should still have some red here at the 9.5. When you're doing curve piecing, you are stretching the fabric, so the straight edges here could be a little bit wonky, and that's okay. Last couple of things, these are optional steps if you'd like to do them, and that's adding some adornments. So I decided that I wanted to do a buckle on the head, and so you have this template. You'll take your fabric, you'll fold it over, trace out your template, and then cut that. You'll do the same thing with some type of double-sided adhesive interfacing, and then you can peel that off and put that on the hat. I think I like that. The next thing is adding a nose. So I'm just going to take a little scrap of fabric I have here, and I'm going to cut a 5-inch circle. You can make your circle bigger or smaller, it's up to you. And I'm going to do some hand basting. So I'm just going to do some stitches along the edge here. I'm going to leave a space right here to here. There would be no thread. I'm going to stuff this with polyfill or leftover batting, and as I'm stuffing it and I get the shape that I want, I'm going to pull these strings, and this is going to fold up for us. this, and it's going to create you a puffy nose, right? And then once I get it all puffed out, then I can sew it closed. And once I finish the quilt, I can go ahead and sew that on where I want so I can finish off my gnome. Okay, so for the assembly, we've looked at this a little bit on the computer. Since this is my centerpiece, decided to focus on this part first. Our pot of gold is going to go here at the bottom. So this is the last step of this row here. For the straight rainbow stripes, you can see how easily these nest together. We're going to do those columns as we put that together. And we're going to do the same thing for our 4-leaf clovers columns. It's also going to have your arm pieces. Now, once I get all this assembled, that's when I'm going to finish the tops. I still have my center one that I have to do here, but this is going to help me decide which way I need it to press, and this is going to help me nest this really well. Now, I'm not going to have time to show you how to quilt this, but I have planned how I do intend to quilt this later. I'm going to be using QCT6 Gold, and I'm going to be using pattern Eclipse in order to take this fun Lucky Day pattern, which you can find on our design store, and I am going to place it where I can cut out the gnome that we have here. So I'm going to go finish up all these little pieces, get it assembled, and show you the final product.
And here's the finished quilt. I used QCT6 Pro with gold features, including pattern Eclipse, so that I could eclipse out the 4-leaf clovers and our gnome. To personalize it, I did some free motion work and some ruler work in the gnome and in the 4-leaf clovers. And I even added a little font stitcher so I could include Luck of the Irish.
If you want to make your very own St. Patrick's gnome quilt, you can find the free pattern in the description of this video. Plus, I'd love to see your St. Patrick's Day projects. Until next time.